Rain, cold, rot. For 2 relentless years, starting in 1315, the skies opened and, well, just refused to close. Crops drowned in the fields. Stored grain turned to mould. Animals collapsed in the mud. Across large parts of Europe, as much as 10 to 15% of the population died. Food prices doubled and even tripled in some regions. And for ordinary families, survival became a daily battle against hunger, disease, and, despair. This wasn't a distant disaster. It was personal. It was slow. And it tested every survival instinct medieval society had. Today, on Ancient Roots Uncovered, we're not just talking about what happened. We're breaking down what it actually took to survive the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317. No romance, no myth, just raw resilience. Eating what once seemed unthinkable. In medieval Europe, bread was life. Up to 70% of daily calories came from grain. Wheat for the wealthy, rye, barley and oats for everyone else. When endless rain destroyed harvests, that foundation cracked. Fields flooded, seed grain failed to sprout. What little was harvested often spoiled in storage because damp conditions encouraged mould. That meant no flour, no bread, no stability. So people improvised. Tree bark was stripped, dried, and ground into coarse meal. It was mixed with whatever scraps of grain remained to form dense, bitter loaves. Wild plants became essential. Nettles, sorrel, dandelion leaves, and wild garlic were boiled into thin soups. Acorns were soaked repeatedly to remove bitterness, then crushed into flour. Even roots and grasses were added to stews. This was famine food, survival food. Knowledge became currency. If you knew which wild plants were edible and which were poisonous, you gained an edge. Those who lacked that knowledge faced deadly risks. In a time without modern medicine, one mistake could be fatal. Livestock were honestly both a lifeline and a loss. Animals were more than just food, They were truly engines of survival. Cows gave milk, oxen ploughed the fields, chickens laid eggs, and pigs provided meat and fat. But when crops failed, well, feed failed too. Hay just couldn't be harvested properly with all that rain. So, animals weakened. Disease spread more easily in damp, crowded conditions. Many families faced a heartbreaking calculation. Should they slaughter animals early to gain short-term food, or try to keep them alive and hope for future recovery? Killing livestock, well, it provided temporary relief, but it also destroyed the next year's security. No ox meant no ploughing when the fields finally dried out, and no breeding animals meant herds just couldn't rebuild quickly. Historical records, they show that cattle populations dropped significantly during those famine years, and recovery took decades. Survival meant thinking beyond the next meal, even while you were starving. That tension, honestly, defined the entire era. Community was, the real safety net. Going it alone was nearly impossible back then. Villages that cooperated had better odds of survival, honestly. Communal ovens baked shared grain supplies. Fishing groups sprang up in river and coastal communities. Fish and shellfish became critical protein sources when farmland failed. In some areas, eels and preserved fish, well, they sustained entire communities. Monasteries and churches sometimes distributed stored grain or offered charity. It wasn't enough to save everyone, but it made a difference for some. Medieval society was built on interdependence, shared labour, shared harvests, shared protection. In famine, that structure became the thin line between survival and collapse. When one household starved, the whole village felt the strain, you see. Cooperation increased collective resilience. Migration became, well, a last resort. When local resources vanished, many chose movement over stagnation. Families left their villages in search of food, employment or relief in towns and cities. The roads filled with the hungry. Some towns shut their gates to outsiders, fearing scarcity would worsen. Tensions rose, theft increased, grain stores were raided. Desperation reshaped behaviour. Migration was dangerous. Travellers faced bandits, exposure and disease, but honestly, staying could mean certain death. Urban centres sometimes had better access to imported grain through trade routes. Ports especially had slightly more flexibility if shipments could arrive from less affected regions. For a few, relocation meant survival. For many others, though, it meant prolonged hardship. Climate was, you know, the invisible enemy. The Great Famine was driven primarily by climate. From 1315 onward, unusually heavy rainfall and cooler temperatures shortened growing seasons. This period marked the beginning of what historians call the Little Ice Age. Grain yields fell sharply. In normal years, farmers might harvest 4 grains for every one planted. During the famine, that ratio dropped dramatically in many areas, sometimes near 2 to 1 or, well, worse. That margin is razor thin. It barely covers seed for the next planting, let alone surplus for survival. Livestock diseases spread more easily in wet conditions. Stored grains sprouted prematurely or rotted. The agricultural system had little buffer. 1 or 2 failed harvests could be catastrophic. Multiple failures were devastating. Mental endurance, you know, was under constant strain. Hunger weakens the body, sure, but it also tests the mind. Chronic malnutrition, well, it reduced immunity, and then disease followed. Historical accounts describe widespread illness during and after the famine years. Even when harvests improved in 1317, many people were just too weakened to recover fully. Psychological stress was immense. Parents watched children grow thinner day by day. Families sold tools, land rights, and even sometimes their own personal freedom to secure food. Some entered forms of bonded labour in exchange for sustenance. Inequality deepened as landowners with reserves gained more control over desperate peasants. Faith became a coping mechanism. Prayer, ritual, and religious processions offered, well, a bit of structure in chaos. Whether or not they changed the weather, they provided emotional endurance. Belief can steady a shaking mind. And in survival situations, mental stability really matters. Preparation and diversity mattered most. Not all communities were equally devastated, you know. Areas with better storage systems fared slightly better. Grain that was properly dried and sealed had a better chance of lasting through those damp seasons. Crop diversity helped too. Regions that grew legumes alongside grains had alternative protein sources, which was honestly a real advantage. Communities near forests could hunt small game, while coastal settlements, well, they relied more heavily on fishing. Diversity created resilience. Monoculture created vulnerability. When one crop failed and nothing else existed to replace it, collapse followed. This is, one of the quiet lessons of the Great Famine. Flexibility and variety increase survival odds. A weakened society before the next storm. By 1317, weather patterns slowly improved. Harvests recovered in some regions, but the population had already been reduced. Economies were strained. Social trust was shaken. Just a few decades later, in the mid-1300s, the Black Death would sweep through Europe. A population weakened by famine was more susceptible to disease. The Great Famine did not exist in isolation. It was part of a chain reaction that reshaped medieval society. Survival during those years required adaptability, cooperation, and relentless endurance. It meant eating what you once rejected, sharing when you had almost nothing. Moving when staying meant death, holding on to hope when logic said otherwise. The Great Famine is not just a story of suffering. It is a study in resilience under extreme pressure. It reveals how fragile food systems can be, and honestly, how powerful human adaptability truly is. If this deep dive into medieval survival opened your eyes, subscribe to Ancient Roots Uncovered and share this with someone who loves history with real depth and grit. The past isn't just memory, it's a survival manual, and we're here to keep uncovering it.